Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm Neil Milliken, and I'm co-chairing this session with my dear friend Susan Scott Parker from Business Disability International. I'm from Atos, where I lead accessibility programs and our practice. I'm particularly pleased to be talking about transportation today. It's an area where you wouldn't think that I struggle, but as someone with neurodivergent conditions, actually public transportation sends me into a panic because I don't know my left from my right and I can't read maps. So I think it's really interesting to hear about all the best practices today. I'll just hand over to Susan briefly to introduce herself.
Thank you very much, Neil. So I'm Susan Scott Parker from BDI, and while I can't claim to be neurodivergent, I can tell you that I have often thought my inability to read a map might bring me under some disability legislation somewhere. So making it as easy as possible to get to the important places that matter, whether it's work, vacations, the Rocky Mountains in my home country, is obviously essential. So we're not here to talk about why accessible transport matters. Everyone who's tuning in today knows fully well why accessible transport matters. We're looking for some practical examples from award winners. And so, Neil, I think you're going to take the lead now because our first speaker is a colleague of yours from Atos.
That's right. So I'm delighted to introduce a friend of mine and colleague of mine, Theo Quick, who is the deputy head of our transport division within our organization. So hopefully we'll be able to dial in Theo now.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Neil. I hope you can hear and see me all okay. And I get a thumbs up, so that's great. Hello, my name is Theo Quick. As Neil says, I'm the Deputy Global Industry Leader for Retail Transport and Logistics at Atos, which means I'm responsible for everything at Atos that we do across our clients in those markets. I'm also pleased to say that I'm one of our internal industry SPOCs for Atos's internal accessibility program. And that means I promote to our teams to think more and action more in an accessible way. So my role here at the start of today's session is to give a big picture before I hand over to our other panelists. So hopefully you should move to the next slide now. Thank you. So we're here today to discuss accessibility for public transportation. We all recognize the challenges. From my own personal experience, whether it's the lack of accessible facilities to step-free access for my father-in-law, or trying to navigate my autistic son through noisy, busy stations, to online solutions which aren't easily readable by technology, whether it's the ability to move swiftly and easily through an airport to get to a transit gate because we've been given too short a layover between two flights. Or perhaps it's just the fact that your disability isn't even visible, and so when you ask for some assistance, it isn't easily granted. The number and variety of the provisions for public transport organisations need to provide, all whilst facing really severely shrunken fare revenues during the pandemic. Transport was probably one of the most affected industries, but let's face it, that isn't an excuse which can be used for years of underinvestment. But there are some glimmers of hope. We're all aware of the Americans with the Disabilities Act, which came to force in the 1990s, but it didn't fund or enforce the changes that were needed. And the European Accessibility Act, which came into force in June 2019, is now with member states to transpose into national law with the 3-year deadline. That clock is ticking very fast. Next slide, please. We live in a physical world. Transportation, in order to be accessible, needs to be physically accessible. From, as I say, step-free access to the provision of a safe space on the transport vehicle, be that a train, a tram, public taxi hire, a bus or a plane, and through the stations and the airports that need to be easily navigable. But for public transit organisations, changing the physical world is expensive. And it also takes a lot of planning time before changes can be made. And again, I'm not making excuses. But despite that physical world that we live in, we're increasingly living in a digital world. So no, I'm not suggesting that the metaverse will replace public transportation, but the digital world is where I see some of the greatest advances coming from. Transport has a huge wealth of data, but I'm afraid that for some less enlightened organizations I talk with, accessibility means just the provision of that data. But I'm pleased to say in my role that we're seeing a lot more clients that we're working with who are much better informed and asking for accessible solutions to their transport problems. There's still a huge amount of education still to be done. And this is where I get great support from Neil and his team and be able to bring that all to the clients. But back to that data, a lot has been done already. But it still can be done. And I'm very conscious of some of the privacy consequences of what I'm about to say. So from real-time journey planners that clearly route for people with disabilities, clearly mark where there's step-free access points, but also include personalized travel time between nodes. So rather than routing on a walker's average speed, traffic lights that can sense when somebody with a disability is approaching and automatically request the crossing, to using CCTV data, camera feeds to identify a PRM. This is the aviation term for a person with restricted mobility who has entered the airport terminal or could be used for a bus station, and have someone to offer assistance there waiting, or use automatic number plate recognition, ANPR, for a traveler with needs to pre-register, and then the operator knows when you pull into the car park, and hopefully before having to go into the terminal, there's no waiting around for assistance having to be requested. And in my autistic son's example, offer a VR experience of the route so that he can understand what he'll see, what he'll hear, to alleviate his anxiety that prevents him from traveling on public transport. Next slide, please. But transport, at least pre-pandemic, was going through a huge disruption. There was more venture capital investment that was being pumped into the mobility solutions than into any other sector. And I include financial services in this too. So from autonomous vehicles to everybody wanting to be the next Uber or Lyft. This has slowed because of the pandemic, but I predict that we will see some of this investment returning. So micro-mobility solutions such as e-scooters and e-bike hire schemes. Mobility as a service, which allows you to have a subscription to travel rather than individual bus, train, cycle hire, or even plane tickets. They understand your end-to-end journey, which provides a tailored transport solution, all for a subscription fee. And yes, the ambulatory world has woken up to dial-a-ride. These new mobility modes are increasingly available in our cities and in our rural environments. We need to ensure that they are accessible to all and not just littering our pavements, which give extra navigational challenges to visually impaired and wheelchair users. But the uses of technology are endless, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more from the other panelists today during the rest of our session. Next slide. But before I end, there's just one more trend that I'm seeing from those more enlightened public transit organizations. They are literally putting their money where their mouth is during their procurement processes. This isn't about the provision of services. Increasingly, we are being asked to demonstrate and deliver our diversity and inclusion policies into the delivery of our services for our public transport clients. This is about job creation for people with disabilities. And for my son, this is music to my ears, as only 22% of autistic adults here in the UK are in full-time employment. I'd just be able to need to support him so he can get on the train to go to work. So I hope my presentation to you today has set the tone for the rest of our panelists. I look forward to hearing from each of them. My name is Theo Quick, and if you'd like to continue the dialogue directly with me, you can reach out to me on Twitter with @TheoQuickWork, and that's all one word. Thank you again, and back to you, Susan and Neil.
Thank you very much, Theo. It's been great to hear from you both as a colleague and as a parent of a child who is autistic. So next up, we have Hilal Kahraman, who is representing Istanbul Airport. So Hilal, are you with us and ready? And we have Seben as well. Excellent. Thank you. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's very nice to be here with you. I'm Hilal Kahraman from Istanbul Airport, and this is our new sign in sign language. You can check signoffice.com to get more information about it. We will present you about our IGA care solutions together with Seben. Next slide, please. Let's start with some facts about Istanbul Airport. We are a newly built airport, as we are fully operational in April 2019. We are a global hub airport with nearly 300 destinations, and we hosted 40 million passengers in 2091 under pandemic conditions. Our architecture and technological infrastructure allow us to design pioneering projects in line with accessibility requirements for our millions of guests from all over the world. What's our perspective on accessibility? Firstly, we welcome all our guests focusing on themselves, not on their differences, with the Turkish hospitality behavior model. We work to make that accessible and independent travel experience is possible for everyone with a right-based perspective. And we support disabled people to take a more active role in life. Next slide, please. Here is our journey. We started to making all the required accessibility standards available in our airport. To see if the standards were sufficient for disabled people, we needed to gain experience together with them. So we met with NGOs and disabled people. We experienced our airport together with them, found the pain points together, and then find solutions together, tested the solutions again together to keep improving this experience. This is a never-ending journey because we always have something more to do. So we still have site visits with disabled people and we care about their feedback. Now I want to share
Care's logo.
with you.
An accessible travel is possible at Istanbul Airport is written on the screen. Drop-off and pick-up point. Accessible hover ist. The blonde woman with the pink jacket in the wheelchair moves towards the terminal.
Let's begin.
The curly-haired woman with the black jacket follows her flight from her phone. Disabled parking lot. Premium greeting. The woman and man passengers with cerebral palsy meet up with the personnel. Assistant call point.
Hello, I need an assistance service. Can you help me?
Priority entrance. Sight-disabled man with the white cane uses the tactile paving.
We all have the right to draw our own route in life.
Accessible route. Loud steps. The woman with the hearing aid gets information through the induction loop system.
Hello, ahead on the left. Have a nice day.
The mother and his son with autism are taking the sunflower badge from the information desk. Assisted check-in. Special passenger service point. Fast track. Passengers with cerebral palsy getting premium service. Video call center with sign language. The woman with the black jacket says, "I want to have proper information." The blonde mother and her child receive the very special guest card. Mother and child spending time in the silent room and very special guest room. The adult changing unite inside the accessible toilet. The woman with the black jacket gets information from the digital info kiosk with sign language. Passengers with cerebral palsy getting premium service in the IGA lounge.
Let's eat something.
And have a nice chat.
And let's listen to the announcements all the time.
Yes, announcements.
Here we are in such a place.
Passengers going towards the flight gate.
As having everything accessible, we aim to ensure accessibility, inclusivity, and to be included in all areas of social life with universal design. We are very happy to contribute and to be with Istanbul Airport, which has taken concrete steps towards this goal.
The woman with the pink jacket goes to the plane with the assistant. With the IGA Cares logo, an accessible travel is possible at Istanbul Airport is written on the screen on the general view of the airport. The logos of Istanbul Airport, erişilebilir her şey, Turkish Airlines, are displayed on the screen.
Hello again. Thank you for watching the video. I'm Seben, also Istanbul Airport, and I'm continuing our presentation. So, through our IGA solution that Hilal said before, we were selected by Airport Council International as the most accessible airport for our accessible awards, and also we awarded this year Zero project. And next slide, please. Thank you. We to ensure an end-to-end accessible journey, it was also important for us to offer accessible public transport. We working quite close with our stakeholders. We know we have accessible bus and taxi options that can be preferred by our guests. They select bus or taxi options. And next slide, please. We have also in the airport, we organize some events, exhibitions, and competitions on disability awareness day, right, public awareness, and we also practice in special events organized by Ministry of Transport to extend our solution to other public transport. And so on next slide, please. Also, as a being Istanbul Airport, we think that accessibility is a human right. A human rights issue beyond being a social responsibilities project. So, based on this perspective, we continue to improve our service, and we offer so that all disability groups can travel independently to Istanbul airports. Thank you for listening our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was extremely impressed by the range of solutions and the amount of choice that you're giving your customers and the amount of consultation that you undertake. So now over to Susan.
Thank you. I'm just wishing every airport in the world was watching. I'm also thinking what a brilliant presentation just before Joanna Wootten, because when you talked about finding the pain points jointly with people with disabilities and finding the solutions jointly, well, that's just what Joanna has been doing throughout her entire career. So it's my pleasure to introduce Joanna Wootten. She's the chair of the Independent Disability Advisory Group at Transport for London. And so this, in effect, is the body that advises the Transport for London on how to ensure that people with disabilities are offered a truly accessible public transport system. So Joanna, I'm looking forward to your presentation, and over to you.
Hi everybody, thank you for that nice welcome, Susan. Okay, I'm going to be talking about sorry, I'm getting an echo, so it's confusing me. I'm going to be talking, hold on. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Transport for London. Now, for people who've been to London, they will know they run the tube, the buses, some of the roads, etc. And if you haven't been to London, I encourage you to come. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Okay, these are the picture of my fellow members of the Independent Disability Advisory Group. There are 10 of us. And this is a photo taken before the pandemic. We haven't all met in person since. Next slide, please. Okay, we've all been appointed, we're all paid to do this. We're not doing this as volunteers, we're all paid to do it. There's a public recruitment process, and we are recruited on the grounds of our knowledge, our professional knowledge, but we also all have lived experience of different impairments. So some of us know a lot about marketing, other people know about transport, customer service, etc. So next slide, please. And we are there to encourage and support Transport for London to move beyond compliance, because obviously there's a lot of legislation, but to think creatively about how things can work tomorrow and in the future. Because if you think about transport, you can be building things that will last for 20 or 30 years. So you have to think about what people might want tomorrow, not just today. And we're living in an ageing world as well. The thing I think is important to think about in relation to the Independent Disability Advisory Group is that we work very closely with Transport for London, and they provide us with a secretariat, effectively, which helps us to have really good relationships across the business, including at director level and with lots of projects. And if you don't have that facilitation, it's not going to be as effective. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about what IDAG does and what we are and what we're not. Hang on, I think we may have jumped a slide. Can you go back, please? Thank you. Okay, we are a strategic advice body, so we give them advice around strategy, and it can be in relation to access, obviously in relation to access issues, disability issues, but also more generically. And it's not just about the built environment, it'll be about customer service, it can be about lighting, it can be about technology, about apps, a previous speaker talked about how it'd be really helpful to know in advance what a journey is going to be like. So it's not just about the built environment. We provide confidential advice, so which means we tell them what we really think. And we provide guidance and constructive approval, but what we don't do is we are not a sign-off group, so we can't say our word doesn't make the difference between whether the project goes ahead or not, but it does have a significant influence. Our voice does matter, and I have seen it, so I know it's important. We are not there to represent every disabled traveller or visitor to London. People, they've got different mechanisms for that. They will reach out much more widely for that. But because we are confidential, they can come to us earlier in a project, or come to us when there's a problem, thinking, we need to solve this, what do you think? And then we say, now you've got to ask more people, maybe bring in access consultants, but we're a sounding board. The value that we add, which is the next slide, we challenge TFL, we're a critical friend. We expose project teams to additional considerations and opportunities. We link TFL to new legislation, innovation and best practice. We give them confidence in thinking about things. Can I just check you've actually moved on to the next slide, because I'm not seeing it happening on screen? Thanks. Okay, thank you. And sometimes people will be worrying about whether they're doing the right thing. We say, no, this looks as good as it can be. Sometimes you've got to be realistic and go, they can't sort some things out. They just have to try and mitigate things the best way they can. It is a good way of demonstrating Transport for London public commitment to getting things right now and for the future. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. We've flexed. Before the pandemic, we would meet in person every 2 months. Now we meet every 2 weeks online. The benefit of this, we're much more flexible. We're able to go in with the project timelines. So that's really nice. It means it's more collaborative because people could come to us very early in the project cycle. They could come to us at the time when it's work for them, rather than trying to work around our meeting timetable. We would often work with people offline. So people have particular expertise with particular issues. They might come to us and meet and go, yeah, it might be a good idea to talk that through more with so-and-so because they know a lot about X. And that will happen. Or they may come back to us again when they've gone away and tried to resolve some of the issues. So that's really been very effective. Okay, next slide, please. Our big wish is that inclusivity and accessibility are considered throughout the project life cycle, that people don't suddenly think about it at the end and go, oh, we've got to think about disabled people. Whoops. It can be a bit too late. Do it much earlier, because if you do it earlier, you can make it inclusive. It will be cheaper because you're not suddenly thinking, forgot about that. It's going to be a bit expensive. And also people sometimes don't realise they're creating barriers. It's unintentional. They think they've got it right, but because they don't have the deep knowledge and lived experience, haven't consulted with the access expert, they may not have thought about really simple things like signage or lighting. It's not always about step 3 access to the tube. And it also reduces social media risk. Social media is a really powerful tool. It's not just about legislation, that you'll get negative campaigns if that happens. Next slide, please. I also want to point out that there can be a big difference between policy and practice. Transport for London has some wonderful policy, that look really good, but sometimes what happens on the ground level can be different. And that's another challenge. It's about consistency right across the system, everywhere we go. And we saw this during the pandemic, that things weren't being done correctly because things were being done in a rush. Okay, next slide, please. So what did we do last year in 2021? We gave input into over 40 projects. This included the design of new tube trains, which is quite exciting. but also things like communication and marketing campaigns, which are important too, because if people say things the wrong way, it can actually encourage more stereotypes or just, it's just it's just annoying, not go into it. But if you can get the tone right, it can make the world a better and more inclusive and more empowering place that really believes in everyone's independence and right to move around. We also put it into strategies, we assess the impact, we visited some places on site, such as ferries and new tube stations. We also challenge TFL. We don't just go, oh, TFL, you're wonderful. That just does not happen. Sometimes we just go, and if we are really moved or we feel they're not really listening to us, we may put in a formal advice note. But I just want to show how we try to be collaborative. We tell them of our concern informally, by email and so on. And then if it's not working, I might escalate it. But that would only be a last resort because we do try to do things together. Okay, last but not least, what do Transport for London think of us? Do they think we're marvellous or really annoying? Well, I want to say this, Transport for London said we're one of the most useful meetings to attend during the project life cycle because it helps them to think about things from different perspectives and also to think about things thoroughly. So, people, next slide please. People are saying it was positive. We'd actually read the materials. So the next slide, thanks. We'd actually read it, and this is what I mean. You need to pay people. You need to understand, get people who know what they're talking about, who will be able to spend that time digesting the material. If you think disabled people are going to be volunteers, they're not going to spend the time studying the stuff. And also we were constructive, but we also accepted their rationale when they said they couldn't do certain things. We went, okay, yes, you really thought about things, and there isn't an easy answer to some situation, but you try to mitigate it as best as you can. So the short answer is, this next slide please, I'm just wrapping up now. Every organisation should have an independent disability advisory group. I obviously think you should also always have a very good chair. And thank you very much for listening, and good luck with everybody else in creating your own independent disability advisory groups.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Hugely important process. I'd like to introduce now a long-standing colleague from South Africa, Guy Davies. Guy is a universal design consultant, his company Disability Solutions, and he's an expert, did I say expert? I did, an access expert, advising on town planning, major infrastructure projects like the Cape Town World Cup Stadium and accessible transport systems in Cape Town. So I'm really interested in your presentation, Guy. Over to you. Unmute, please, Guy. Guy, you're mute.
There we go. Have we got me? Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the Zero Project for inviting us along. As Susan explained, my name is Guy Davies. We run a company, Disability Solutions, and have been operating in South Africa for 20 years. Recently, we have been involved on the bus rapid transport systems, and perhaps we can go to the first slide, please. And these have been put in various different cities around South Africa, the major cities, as a means to address the inaccessibility of the past. But the one thing that was very clear in doing all these is that all our cities, and indeed, I think this is true of all developing cities worldwide, is that the existing system very much operates on private minibus taxis, the sort of Toyota Hiace quantum size vehicle. And without a doubt, what we identified is that we need a replacement to that vehicle. We need an accessible minibus taxi. Next slide, please. Now, what has happened is in South Africa and indeed many other developing countries, the whole environment has been designed and built up around the size of this vehicle. So our towns and our townships have been developed and have developed over time to enable that size vehicle to get around, but actually nothing larger. So we can't take our larger minibus taxi vehicles or larger buses into those townships. It's got to be a minibus taxi size vehicle. The problem is the present vehicles are inaccessible. And we've looked at making changes. The problem is you can't just make a small fraction of the fleet. And this is normally the comeback, is that when designing a new system, the question generally comes up, so how many of our vehicles should we make accessible? What proportion? What's the percentage? It's very simple, it's 100%. You can't have a small, even 50% would be no good. If I'm waiting for a bus and it comes, it needs to be an accessible bus that comes every time. I don't want to wait until the accessible bus comes along. Next slide, please. So the quest and our search was for a similarly sized, similarly priced vehicle. It was very important that whatever we put in place shouldn't be extraordinarily expensive, and it shouldn't, in terms of technology, be too complicated. So we looked at either, and this is still the option, a complete vehicle that's produced by manufacturers, or a conversion kit that can be added to existing vehicles so that they can be adapted to make them accessible. Next slide, please. So what we did is we approached a group of engineers and we said, this is what we want. We need a vehicle that would allow independent access. So that means a ramped access, ideally 1 in 15, but perhaps 1 in 12, right from the ground, from level surface, because what we're talking about, we don't necessarily have hard surfaces, gravel roads. We're loading from sand. There isn't even a curbside to load from. So we need to be able to load 1 in 12, 1 in 15 from the ground. The space that the wheelchair users need mustn't take up existing seats. There's a strong feeling from the existing operators that if we remove and have a huge area that's there for wheelchairs, they quickly get frustrated because they see this huge open space that isn't occupied all the time, and they think how many paying customers they could put in there. So we need to have it flexible. So there is the wheelchair space, but then there's also seats when those wheelchairs are not being used. What we found is that the traditional rear-wheel drive vehicles, the Toyota Quantums, Toyota Hiace, which are rear-wheel drive, actually don't lend themselves very well to be adapted. Because they're rear-wheel drive, they have a prop shaft that runs down the length of the vehicle, and that limits how low you can lower the floor. So really, it's got to be a front-wheel drive vehicle, but still that gives us a huge range of options if we're doing a kit. Very importantly is that any adaptation that we were looking at, and this was the challenge we gave to the engineers, is it must be simple. You've got to be able to install it and fix it with basic tools. You shouldn't need to have specialist equipment or specialist training. It's got to be straightforward and uncomplicated, something that can be fixed in a township, in a rural environment with basic tools. And then lastly, we also asked them to provide it so it can be automated. What often happens in these situations is you have a driver and then you might have an assistant to go with him who perhaps takes the money and acts as a bit of a bodyguard. But really we should be looking at having just the driver, and so people are able to load independently. Now, we don't want him to move from his seat, so we need automated operation of the doors, of the ramp, and also the suspension that lowers down. So next slide, please. So we gave this to the group of engineers here in South Africa based in George, and they came back with the solution, which is either a kit or it could be a fully developed vehicle. It's a double ramp, so the ramp comes out in 2 stages. So if you're loading from a curbside, you can just put out 1 ramp and you get a 1 in 15 loading. If you're loading from the ground, then both ramps come out, the suspension lowers, and you can load at about 1 in 12. In future, we'll probably want that loading from both sides, but that will come with time. This is the first prototype that we've used. What we've used is flip-up aircraft style seating. So if you look on an aircraft, they can move the rows, take the rows in and out. So it's very much the same idea and actually clips into the floor of the bus in exactly the same way. So this gives flexibility in use. So normally you would have all the seats in place and the front 2 rows are flipped down so that the squabs of the seats can drop down out of the way. And that allows a huge space for wheelchair users or for people that need the larger space to maneuver and move around. But importantly, you're not losing any seats. All those squabs can lift upright and you've got the full number of seats available. The controls for the door and for the suspension and seats are all operated by the driver and they're pneumatically operated. They chose to go the route of pneumatically operated rather than hydraulic because this is simpler to operate and actually it's less hazardous. You haven't got very high pressure oils inside the vehicle. But again, because it's just an air system, this is the sort of thing that can be used and can be fixed in rural areas, in places where they don't have a large supply of specialist equipment. So this was vital. The next slide, which we'll skip over, is actually a video of the actual vehicle. So we'll skip over that. But if you'd like to look at that in your own time, it gives it. So we're now at the stage where we're working on the second prototype, which is based on a VW chassis. The first one was a common chassis to Citroën, Peugeot, and Dodge. The second one, which we're looking for funding with now to take it further, we're looking at doors opening on both sides. Here in South Africa, our BRT, our bus rapid transport, has median stations. So we need to load from both sides. And we're taking this and talking to operators, to cities, to drivers, to people with disabilities, and getting their feedback in order to improve it. Next slide, please. So finally, to wrap up, what we're hoping to gain from this is a specification sheet that we can then give to governments and give to organizations. What we then require is for governments to say, this is our requirement for a minibus taxi. If you want to buy, purchase, or even operate a minibus taxi in this environment, you must comply with this specification. And in the same way as you can't buy a car without seatbelts or cushions these days, it should be the same with minibus taxis. If you want to buy a minibus taxi for public use, it must be accessible. We'll lay down the specification, and then we need, first of all, the countries to come along and adopt that specification. Then the manufacturers will come on board, and they'll start to compete with one another. That's shooting through at breakneck speed. That's the end of it. But obviously, any questions, and if people would like to email me and contact me afterwards, I'll be happy to share some of our information.
Thank you very much. Do you know, as I was listening, I was thinking engineers really do matter. And if they just started to do this automatically, we wouldn't have to look at retrofitting because it would be impossible to buy an inaccessible minibus. So I'm now going to hand over to my co-chair, Ian.
Close. Neil.
Neil. Why did I call you Ian?
No idea. Lack of sleep, maybe.
That's it.
I think that was an excellent presentation from Guy, and it actually posed the question in my mind, if we can do this with minibuses and enable flexible seating, why is it not possible for well-funded airlines to do the same? So it gives me great pleasure to now introduce Marinka Bakula Andelic from the city of Zagreb. So are you ready?
Yes. Yeah. I'm very glad to be with you here today and to present our big project, the Accessible Zagreb service. And thank you, Zero's project team, for this opportunity. You can start with presentation. The Accessible Zagreb service is a service providing citizens and visitors of Zagreb with 3 layers of accessibility information: individual buildings, streets and roads, and accessible information of public transport. We are developing this service for over 100,000 persons with disabilities and for persons with limited mobility living in Zagreb or are visiting Zagreb. Please, next slide. This service was developed based on the handbook Zagreb Guide for Persons with Disabilities. This handbook was first published in 2001 and has been updated on a regular basis. It contains information on more 2,500 objects divided into categories such as education, health, sports, culture, etc. The handbook was converted into a web service and a mobile app in 2019, making it more interactive and accessible. The present form is a result of hackathon with local students and startups. Please, next slide. In 2020, we upgraded our application in collaboration with the University of Zagreb by mapping of accessibility of roads in the wider city center. The mapping targeted motorized wheelchair users. The information has been added to the Accessible Zagreb service. Algorithm was created which helps users navigate from point A to point B, avoiding mapped obstacles. Please, next slide. We are currently implementing a Horizon 2020 project under short name TRIPS. The goal of this project is development of digital solutions for a more inclusive public transportation. Within this project, we are mapping accessibility of public transport. We have close coordination with our public transport providers, Zagreb Electric Tram and Croatian Railways. The information will be added to the accessible service by the end of this year. We hope so. Please, next slide. Development of Accessible Zagreb service is based on collaboration with academy, private and non-private profit sector. Persons with disabilities and hackathon participants have been involved in the process from the beginning. We are now developing a system which will allow citizens to participate and add accessibility data to the Accessible Zagreb service. Finally, Accessible Zagreb is a digital service in continuous development based on the needs of citizens with limited mobility. Please, next slide. Accessible Zagreb targets all persons with limited mobility. It also promotes use of pedestrian zones and public transport, which helps reduce the carbon footprint. Accessibility information provided by the Accessible Zagreb service help in improving citywide infrastructure. Finally, development of this service has improved cooperation between key stakeholders in the field of accessibility. Please, next slide. We plan to grow the service through a crowdsourcing platform. There are volunteers conducting the mapping. We are planning on developing a curriculum for mapping of roads with the University of Zagreb. This will allow every generation of students to participate in the development of Accessible Zagreb. Finally, we are planning additional EU funding for the development of this service. Please, next slide. There are still many things we need to do. We plan to further expand the existing accessibility database with additional information. We want to integrate our specialized transport for persons with disabilities, wheelchairs users, in the service. Namely, in 1994, the city of Zagreb introduced a specialized transport for persons with disabilities. Today, the transport of adult persons with disabilities is carried out by 20 fully adapted vans, and for children by 15 vans. We plan to provide additional support for blind and visually impaired users, to integrate new assistive technologies, and to implement data on public amenities. We would like to help other municipalities to develop such a service. We are currently in the process of implementing public transport data. Our main goal is to make a door-to-door service that provides information on the mobility and accessibility of persons with all types of disabilities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's, again, really impressive, the work that you're doing. I think one of the most important things for me is the fact that you're trying to provide real-time information for passengers, because static information doesn't really give you what you need in the real world when you're traveling. So congratulations on doing that. I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Jasmina Khanna, who is an associate project manager within Atos Syntel in India, but also runs a not-for-profit, Access to Hope. We recognize that in this world, we haven't always designed accessible, and Jasmina's work concentrates on addressing some of the things in the current environment, retrofitting accessibility. So hopefully Jasmina will be with us now. Jasmina, we can see you, but you're a bit quiet.
Yes. Thank you, Zero Project, for inviting me. It is an honor to present. Next slide, please. Okay, so I would like to talk about my role at Atos. Atos is the IT company which employs about 1.7 million people across the world. They are into building IT solutions in various areas. So my role at Atos is as a project manager, and the latest project that I am working on is the joint inclusion challenge for 2022 with Vieitez, which is an IT solution company again. Next slide, please. I'm also a co-founder of an NGO called Access to Hope, which is working with people with disabilities. We focus on areas like accessibility, education, and rehabilitation and empowerment for people with disability. Our efforts focus on making public spaces accessible in the city of Mumbai, which is the financial capital of India. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to talk about the good, bad, and ugly of accessibility in India. The good part is that Government of India has policies for accessible infrastructure and such as the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which is also known as Accessible India Campaign, and Rights of the Person with Disability Act 2016. The bad part of it is that lack of awareness about disability and accessibility among people, government officials are alike. Negligent end-to-end accessibility is available across public transportation facilities. Offers encouragement on payment. A lack of awareness among the people with disability and their rights and laws and facilities. The ugly part I would like to talk about is corruption, inertia for implementation of policies by the Government of India that are related to disability and accessibility, and there is social discrimination of people with disability. Next slide, please. So, as I told you, the good part of that, we have got policies. So, first part will be what is the right of proximate disability. Act 2016. It is a law by the Government of India that fulfills its obligation of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of People with Disabilities, ratified by India in 2007. So the bad part of accessibility is lack of awareness. Lack of awareness of and sensitivity among the people and government officials, lack of knowledge and training among staff to operate disability-friendly features, lack of awareness among the people with disability about their rights, and negligence of end-to-end accessibility across public transportation facilities. For example, compartments for people with disability are available, but there is no way that a person on a wheelchair can reach the railway station to catch the train. Public buses have hydraulic lamps, but the bus stops are inaccessible. No announcement for visually impaired, no information about accessible buses and bus stops. Next slide, please. Environment on payment. This is a very, very big socio-economic issue because all the lower class people who run their businesses by the payment to run the business. Next is corruption, lack of awareness and sensitivity among people and government officials, lack of knowledge and training among staff how to on how to operate disabled-friendly features in a share to implement government policies. As the government officials feel accessibility is not important, policies are just on paper. The process of inter-department approval is very tedious. Social discrimination. People with disabilities are considered as a burden within families, societies, and government. Discrimination is there at all levels. Next slide, please. Lower of access to inaccessibility. We follow the Government of India guidelines on accessibility. We enjoy, we are following PPS model, private, public, and social model, wherein we as an NGO appoint an architecture firm that has knowledge about accessibility to give us the design intervention and ask the local authorities, local government authorities to implement the design interventions. We also act as auditors pre and post execution of work by the local government of India on accessibility. Next slide, please. Accessible transportation in Mumbai. Issues with accessible transportation, inadequate end-to-end connectivity. There's no end-to-end connectivity. Yes. So suppose if I want to catch a bus, how do I reach the bus station? Because even reaching a bus stop is an effort. Because even the roads are not accessible. So this is a very, very big issue. Another example is reaching the station, railway station, that I've already covered in my previous slide. Unavailability of disabled friendly train and compartment and buses. Practically non-existent of accessibility on other railway stations. Inadequate promotions of available accessible transport stations, options for people with disability, which prevents them from running within the city. So, for example, the local buses in Mumbai have been made accessible, but people with disability are not made aware of it. So we are working on this issue. So through access to hope, we are planning to sensitize and train the government bus, public networks, bus networks staff. We are advocating for end-to-end connectivity to actualize its implementation at the government level. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the photographs of the inaccessible infrastructure which we have done through our pre-audit. Next slide, please. This is an accessible bus on in the top picture, and this is an accessible plane. The below picture is showing an accessible payment which is accessible across the disability. So these pictures show the dimension of the payment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmina. I think it's really important that we address these islands of accessibility in a sea of inaccessibility, and the work that you're doing to advocate for that is really important. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. Yes, the importance of this end-to-end thinking as we enable people to actually contribute to the economy, because at every step of that journey, they're going to be either working or accessing an opportunity to spend their money, whatever. Well, it's my privilege now to move us from India to Poland. So I'm introducing Ewa Raczynska-Bulawa, who is with LKA, the railway company that is actually launching, or has launched, a comprehensive accessibility program. So I'm sure, Ewa, you'll be talking about end-to-end.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I would like to tell you what we have done in Łódź until now. So first of all, a few words about us. We are a regional train operating company. We are operating in Łódź and in Łódź region. On weekends, we go to cities like Warsaw or Poznań. We are a very modern orientated company. Our focus is giving high quality and to constantly develop our services. We have passenger surveys. We analyze flows of passengers in order to make our offer even better. Our passengers are mainly commuter services. We are mainly people going to schools, to work, or going back to their homes. And regarding this high quality of services, if it wouldn't be, of course, possible to just not to see people with disability traveling day to their work, to their schools. And we are very happy and very proud that that we are part of their day-to-day life. So basically we, in order to create a very high standard for them, and we have elaborated the whole strategy leading us towards the full accessibility of our services. We didn't do it alone. We are cooperating with several of our very active and very nice passengers with disabilities. We cooperate with several local and national NGOs representing people with disabilities. So we had their advice, we had their support. And I'm proud to say that we did it together. At first, a little bit of history. When we started operating in 2014, the reality of Polish railways were old trains with a very high floor. Imagine that you have to get to the train where the floor is somewhere here. It's really difficult even for non-disabled passengers. So there was, of course, the idea of getting modernized old trains, but finally we did the other thing. We bought 100% of a new rolling stock. we were the first, our trains were first passenger trains getting a certificate of conformity with European transport interoperability standards, among other TSA PRM. So we got it. We got fully accessible trains. This is a start, and this is something which is very important. This is not only the trains which we have purchased. We also built a very modern technical depot for them, which is important to every passengers because we can assure the reliability and punctuality of our services. The maintenance is done by the producer of our trains. This is something which is also the part of the high quality of our standards for every passenger. Well, in our trains, there is a low floor at the platform level. We have many of stops in which regions are now being modernized, and they have this suitable height. We have wide doors with no steps, which is very important. Both this fact that these are wide doors and that they have no steps. Also, which is important, we have lifts for wheelchair users. This is something which is not maybe commonly used until now on Polish railways. We don't have ramps. Ramps are very difficult to use because they have this constant problem with inclination. Stops are at a different level. And there can be stops where this platform is barely visible for passengers looking down. So, and the platform, the ramps have to have this level of inclination. So that the person on a wheelchair could get into this train in a safe and comfortable way. So it has to be, regarding very low platforms, it has to be a very heavy and very long ramp. And this brings the problem to using this ramp, because there have to be even two persons, two people from train crew who have to use this ramp. And these lifts, when they are properly maintained, and they are properly maintained in our technical depot, they cause no problems. I can use this lifts, and I even did once it for the purpose of filming when I was pregnant. So there is no problems in using it, even if you are not the sportman. In our trains have features which allow maximum independence for people with hearing and sight disabilities. We have contrast markings, we have raised or braille markings, we have audible sounds of the doors being unlocked, we have audible sounds of doors being locked. And plus we have something which is not commonly used in trains. In our 14 new trains, there is an induction loop. This is something which is commonly used in Norway or Sweden, but we were the first one to use it in Poland. Regarding this already mentioned cooperation with our passengers, we have noticed that we're talking to many people with sight disabilities, and you know, not many people are sight disabled since their birthday. Our inspiration for this innovation project was a man who lost his sight when he was 18 years old. So he doesn't use Braille for many reasons. In such way that it would allow him independent life. So in trains going to Warsaw, we have a seat reservation. So that is why we decided to introduce a new innovative product, which is place numbers with Braille, of course, with relief printing, with a QR code and NFC tags, meaning that everybody can enter the train, take out their mobile phone and read, or the telephone will read the number. No apps, nothing is needed except NFC in being on the phone. So it's something which makes life much more even easier. For those who are not from European Union, we have, as every transport operating company in Europe, we have to obey to the regulation 1371. Which requires from the transport operating company assistance with a prior notification of 48 hours. Before the journey. So come on, who wants to organize his trip, most of all in daily life, for 48 hours before the journey? We have realized that it happens that most of our passengers just come to our trains. They were normally served like every other passengers. We train our passengers since the beginning. We are training our train crew since the beginning in using the lifts. That they were given since the beginning the assistance just without prior notification. We have prior notification, of course, because it's legally required. It's 24 hours before the journey. And we have about 100 prior notification per year. So it's really not much regarding the number of our passengers. But it's, I have to tell, it's important for people who are not traveling with us on a daily basis, who are less frequent users. Yes, okay. But so we have launched a few years ago together with telling officially to our passengers that we don't need prior notification. We have organized regular train crew staff trainings, and it includes meeting with people with disabilities, disability simulations, and so on and so on. And it really works. Just one thing about our trains, it's not enough. It's just one part of our accessibility. What is important? It's the information and communication accessibility. We have reworked our website so that it would be fully accessible. And what is very important, we are working together with hearings disability organizations, and you know, it's sign language that we are offering information, not in Polish and not in sign language. So since the beginning, since 7 years, we are offering sign language online interpreter in our cash desks and on our website in order to connect to the telephone helpline. We realized that it's really simple to make it available also on our trains. So every train crew member has a tablet where there is an app allowing to connect to a sign language interpreter. So basically it's safe, it's reliable, and it's done for our hearing disabilities people. Just for a quick end, I would like to, we are of course a little bit, we had problems with pandemic, we had a drop in our passengers. Right now we have regained the number of passengers, overall passengers, to this level of before the pandemic. But what happened? We asked people during the onboard survey whether they have disabilities or not. We had 3% in 2018. In 2021, we had already 5%. So this is a very, very big award for our efforts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If I could just go quickly now to our final speaker, but it's a great story, Ana Maria Vieitez, coming to us from Barcelona, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this session. I'm an architect from the Accessibility Department of Metropolitan Transport of Barcelona. TMB is a common name for the companies Ferrocarril Metropolitano de Barcelona, I think. Okay, thank you. Okay, TMB is a common name for the companies Ferrocarril Metropolitano de Barcelona and Transportes de Barcelona that manage metro and bus network in the city of Barcelona and 10 municipalities of the metropolitan area. It is a leading public transport of Catalonia. Due to the exceptional situation of COVID-19, metro and bus services have suffered a drop in passenger numbers in 2020 and 2021. Nevertheless, before 2020, the demand was more than 600 passengers per year. Okay. According to data from the Department of Social Affairs, almost 240,000 people with disabilities and more than 530,000 people over 60 years live in Barcelona metropolitan area in which TMB operates. These people form the target group for whom we work incorporating elements that facilitate access and use to all citizens, considering customer diversity with a 360 degrees vision. People with visual and hearing disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, senior citizens, children, or foreign. Today, we want to share with you 3 cases which we have recently worked in order to improve accessibility conditions. Okay. The first one is a virtual assistant at bus stops. TMB has implemented a new technological system in the bus network that is based on the interaction between electronic beacons and the user's mobile phones. The new system, developed by TMB at home, helps visually impaired people to identify which bus line is approaching to the stop and ensure that they will take the one that suits them. To use it, you only need to have a mobile phone with Android or iOS operating system and a TMB application installed for activates the notifications by voice message of the situation of the next stop, the line to which the bus it belongs to, its identification number, the proximity to the stop, and if it is stopped at the bus stop, and the doors open. In addition, and that's very important for us, the user has the possibility of sending a message to the driver to take into account that at the next stop there is a visually impaired person who wants to get into the bus. Another digital skill that we have implemented is an ambulance system. It's about a digital signature for Barcelona's metro and bus networks to promote autonomous use by visually impaired people. Currently, smart tags or DD tags are found in all bus stops and in the infrastructure of the metro network. With an ambulance app and mobile camera, can capture a DD tag without knowing where exactly it is. Thus, visually impaired people can read the signs of public transport networks, receiving precise orientations and warnings to move safely. At a bus stop, the ambulance application informs the user of the name and code of the stop, the line that passed through, the destination of each one, the expected time to arrival, and possible alterations of the service. In a metro station, each space is labeled with its description: access, lobby, sales area, validation line, stairs, elevators, SOS intercoms, boarding points. And this is possible for some technological characteristics of the detect codes. Can be read in movement at a much greater distance than QR code, even with wide angle reading up to 160 degrees, without having to focus the mobile camera, and in all light conditions. Once read, the information contained in the label is reported in voice format and, very importantly for us, in the language configured on the user's mobile phone. Okay, maybe if you have the ambulance application on your mobile, you can read this tag on the presentation, and you will have all the information of this session. Okay. As a result of our experience in the implementation of the system for the first time in a public transport network, we are collaborating in its implementation like proof of concept in the operation of Metro Los Angeles and SMRT in Singapore. We have recently finished the implementation in the railway network of ETS from Bilbao, and soon we will begin with the implementation in the railway network of Valencia in Spain. The last operator that has contacted us for being interested in its implementation is RATP of Paris. Finally, I would like to share with you the project that we have present to the Zero project, call for nominations, and that has been awarded. It's about the accessible design of the new Barcelona metro trains. A historic renewal of the TMB train fleet has offered the opportunity to carry out a detailed review of accessibility conditions. The result of this review has been decisive for drafting the technical conditions that TMB trains must meet. TMB has designed and incorporated with a high level of detail all the elements linked to the accessibility of the trains to be pursued from now on, and of the trains, all trains of the old fleet at the time of their renewal, responding not only to the compliance with the regulations of accessibility, but also to improvements historical requests by the representatives of disability entities or associations with whom TMB maintains a constant and close relationship of dialogue and participation. Some of these elements are all access doors have high color contrast in relation to the rest of the train, and they have intermittent sound and light signals. The accessible doors have automatic opening in each station. They also have a light and acoustic warning device. The train has 20 reserved seats for people with reduced mobility located in the center of each car. They will have a contrasting color in relation to the rest of the seats and a custom signaling design integrated into the reserved seat itself. Each group of seats has 2 stop request buttons that will send a warning advice to the driver indicating that a person with reduced mobility will get off at the next station. There are spaces with the capacities to accommodate 4 passengers using wheelchairs. All reserved space have the same mechanism and devices that passengers can use in other areas of the train, such as the stand button, emergency handle, and intercom, located at a height that guarantee the reach of wheelchair users. We have present sensors, and the international accessibility symbol will be placed on the floor in order to reinforce its signature and guarantee preferential use. A magnetic induction loops system has also been implemented to improve hearing accessibility. We have made available a full-scale wooden model to assess, together with several groups of people representing disability reference entities, all the elements related to train accessibility obtaining their approval. To finish, just a little bit reflection. The right to mobility is universal, and we have to assume the commitment to guarantee it all users under equal conditions. That's why we have to work to respond not only to their needs, but also to the expectations in their travel experience. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Brilliant examples of getting it right. But as I listen, I'm thinking we should be in a world where to be inaccessible is regarded as bizarre and weird, where it would just be poor design and good design instead of getting awards for accessibility. Isn't it odd? Yeah. I often thought of a friend who used to say, why do we have buildings with doors in them? Why doesn't everybody just climb through the window? Well, you're supposed to just be able to walk in. It's just the way it is. Thank you, everyone. Do we have time for a couple of questions now, Mr. Chairman?
I believe we've been permitted to allow a couple of questions, so if people do have them, that would be great.
Or you're just allowed to say, what a fantastic bunch of presentations.
Thank you. So we have
a question?
2 people with raised hands.
Please say who you are when you ask your question.
Good morning. Ger Craddock here from Dublin, Ireland. Now, great presentations. I suppose the key question is, how is this being audited or monitored going forward, these projects by the... So I suppose it's a general question to all the participants.
Are you saying, how is the Zero project monitoring, or are you saying how are our presenters monitoring?
Yeah, the existing projects being presented here, because without ongoing monitoring of accessibility, as we all know, a huge problem with the maintenance and upkeep on accessibility. So.
Who would like to answer that? I'd like to bring Joanna Wootten in, if Joanna is still with us, because one of the key functions of your group, as I understand it, as advisors, is to help them to sustain the improvements that Transport for London is making over time. Joanna, can you come in on that?
Hi, I'm muting myself. Yes, I mean, you're right that our role is to keep, in a way, to be Transport for London's conscience and just reminding them when things may not be working as well as they think or they could be. But it's also, I think social media and others are really important in complaints and so on, and making sure that they really monitor the complaints and act on them as well. But I'd like to hand over to my fellow presenters to see if they've got anything to add.
Thank you. Anybody else like to come in on that?
So I think that one of the things that we will need to see under the European Accessibility Act, not just for digital assets, but for the built environment and transport, is proper creation of observatories that have teeth, that will work to recognize standards, because I think that that fragmentation at the moment is a real challenge for us, and that it's only when we have recognized standards that can be universally applied that we can really track this properly.
I'd just like to add best practice in terms of developing 3 to 5 year access management plans in the way that you would do a refurbishment plan if you were running a train station, for example. Building into that long-term planning the need to monitor that the equipment is still working, that you're looking ahead, investing in the innovations that you know are coming but you haven't yet got. So this is all long-term planning, is it not? Anything you'd like to add?
Regarding the control of our existing equipment and the maintenance, we have everything in our internal regulations written, and we have controls, regular controls, and we are very focused on the reliability of our systems. So basically, it's a very important question about the maintenance, about the reliability, because it's not commonly considered as an important thing, because there are some projects which are just which are just happened, and they are not followed, and nobody just it sometimes happens that there is some equipment and it doesn't work a few years ahead. So basically we have the whole strategy of control.
Thank you. Neil, do you want to take the next question?
I think there was one more from the floor at the back, so yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Amanda Gibbard from the Department of Transport in South Africa. And I'd just like to thank all the presenters very much. I've learned a lot, and it's really interesting to see the range of innovative solutions that can fix problems, and that the important thing is the outcome. If someone can manage to use the public transport system to get around so that they can be independent, and to some extent, you know, the way that happens can be different. And it's good to learn from that. I've got a couple of questions and one point. The first question is, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic was spread by people traveling. And that's one of the reasons why travel is so important, because it spreads viruses. You know, the HIV virus was spread through travel. What is it that the transport systems can do to make sure people are safe in the future, predicting that there will be other pandemics? Because I think it's an important question for the transport people who work in transport to answer. The second is, it is really important that government plays its part, because if government doesn't implement something as important as transport and making it accessible, then people's right to move is taken away. And it's so easy for government to say, well, we don't mind. You may think you have rights, but we're not going to do anything about it. And it maybe is building on the other question, what can be done to make sure that doesn't just suddenly stop? The third one is just to recognize and acknowledge my colleague from South Africa in his presentation, and also to add the importance of side access into vehicles because of the danger of the way other people drive. And one of the things about this minibus taxi, which is unusual, is it has normal side access, which means that you don't have to go through the rear of the vehicle, which is incredibly dangerous in the roads environment. But thank you very, very much for all the presentations. I've learned a huge amount from listening today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. I think that the question of safety warrants a panel in itself, because there are so many things that we could look at on that. But I do think that the comments that you made, particularly about side access, are really relevant, because people end up in the middle of the road and putting themselves at risk. So the design of vehicles and the design of access to vehicles is a key part of how we look at making an inclusive infrastructure in the future. I'm really sorry that we've run well over time and we do need to close. I hope that we can maybe take your questions and answer them online or offline afterwards. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists for participation today. It's been a great session. I've learned a lot, and want to thank you for all your contributions to making this a much more equitable and reachable, therefore accessible place. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.